This video is being made for those black people that are conscious without any support system around you. When you started wearing your hair within its natural state, your family and friends told you that it looks awful and told you to go get a perm. When you started dating beautiful melanated partners, you were told by your friends and family that the person is too dark and that you should therefore find a lighter skinned partner if you wanted prettier children. When you stopped going to church because you realized that it actually makes no sense to hold on to a religion that was written by history's proven most ungodly group of people and that was brutally beaten into the blood-soaked minds of our ancestors by their ungodly enslavers, and your family and friends told you that they'll disown you if you abandoned the religion of our ungodly enslavers. They also discouraged you from critically thinking about your religion by telling you that it's the devil that's trying to trick you. They want you to believe that there's no validity in critically thinking outside of the radius of information presented to us by the white society. It's how the black mentally enslaved have been programmed to keep us all mentally enslaved. It can be extremely frustrating when our family and friends are the ones condemning us for rightfully trying to regain our true and authentic African mindset. It can literally feel as if we're being gaslit by our own loved ones, which can be emotionally draining. It's especially disheartening to see that we Africans, that are the great thinkers that civilized the world and that are the true builders of the pyramids, are now so mentally enslaved by the white society's fraudulent propaganda. I also know this pain intimately well because those who swims against the river's current knows intimately well the strength of the river's current. African proverb. I deal with this scenario by merely taking the mental stance and position that a lion doesn't concern itself with the opinions of a sheep. I treat those black mentally enslaved critics as merely, I dismiss them. But I do realize that there are many that are awakened that haven't yet developed this mental fortitude that I have when dealing with the black mentally enslaved family members and friends. I therefore hope that the words within this video provides you with a greater understanding of the situation that both comforts you and empowers you. Sometimes a fruit falls from a tree and rolls so far away from its roots that it's no longer part of the tree. The hard fall and long journey profoundly changes the fruit, and there's nothing that can be done to return the fruit back to its roots. Sadly, it's the same way for many Africans throughout the diaspora that have been stripped of our many truths and have been deeply indoctrinated with white mental enslaving lies. Many have normalized the white society's distortion of their minds, and there's nothing you can do to restore their minds to its true, original, authentic state. Regardless of how alone you may feel being conscious, never forget being conscious is a gift from your ancestors. Those of us that are conscious becomes conscious because some of us are born with a spiritual insight that forces us to choose true knowledge over the veil of ignorance. Our spiritual insight causes us to reject the false worldview grafted upon us from birth through white social engineering. We begin sensing that something is amiss and we start looking for answers. Inner knowledge and our outer experiences shows us a side of reality that others are oblivious to. And so begin our journeys of awakening. Each step of the journey is made by following our inner spiritual guide, being guided by our ancestors, instead of following the crowd of mentally enslaved. That's who we are. Now to help you understand your situation among the mentally enslaved is a story I've written entitled The African Boy Born with a Gift of Insight. The story takes place on a plantation near Petersburg, Virginia in 1836. This plantation is one that is struggling financially. There had been several years since the plantation had a successful and profitable crop season. The low crop production often resulted in the master often selling off slaves every holiday to obtain extra money. Moreover, during these winter months, the slaves were often given very little to eat. During good days, the slaves ate twice a day, and during the bad days, only once. These good days didn't come very often. The master explained that such rationing was necessary because of the low crop production during the seasonal months. However, the master hid extra food for himself and family within an old abandoned barn, a barn house that was made off limits to the field slaves. The off limit rules were strictly enforced. Therefore, any field slave that was found near the barn house would immediately receive 25 lashes across his or her back. Furthermore, to ensure that the field slaves stayed away from the barn, the master instructed the house slaves to spread rumors among the field slaves, telling them that the barn was also haunted. For years, the master's scheme worked perfectly, and as a result, it also had enough food for his family during the winter. While the field slave often lost an average of 20 pounds every winter. However, this scenario was about to change, because among the enslaved Africans, there lived a very exceptional, inquisitive little 8-year-old boy. This little enslaved African child was uniquely different from the others. His mind could not be colonized. The boy was daringly proud, insightful, inquisitive, even though many of his inquiries was against the master's instructions. This boy would often get in trouble because he was always critically thinking. He also learned to read and write at the age of 7, a family secret that his 19-year-old mother made him adamantly promise never to indulge to anyone because it was illegal back then, not even to other slaves. She gravely feared that if the words of the child's reading ability got back to the master's house, then her only son would be severely punished and sold away, given that it was illegal for slaves to be taught to read and write. Well, early one morning, this little boy awakened with a desire to find out what was really hidden in the barn. He quickly got up, got dressed while his young mother slept, and he sneaked out to the barn under the darkness of the early morning. As he got closer to the barn, his heart began to beat rapidly. This was fueled by the fear of the barn being haunted and of the potential 25 lashes that he would receive if he was caught near the barn. Nonetheless, the boy continued onward until he reached the barn's large doors. There was an old rusted lock on the door, so the boy picked up the biggest rock that his little arms could lift, and he began hitting against the lock until the lock eventually gave and broke and fell to the ground. The boy then slowly opened the large squeaky door of the barn and immediately shocked with what he found. The barn was filled with many hidden jars and cans of food. The boy was elated about his discovery. He was anxious to show and inform the other enslaved Africans, so he rang the old triangulated bell, awakening them. The other enslaved Africans heard the bell and quickly dressed and rushed out to find out what was going on. Upon reaching to the barn, the enslaved Africans were surprised to find that it wasn't their master waiting for them, but it was instead a little boy waiting for them. One of these enslaved, a large black man, said, "Boy, what's going on and why did you awaken us so early?" The boy responded that he had found lots of food hidden in the barn. The large man responded, "You know master told us all to never come near this barn. So what's wrong with you, boy? Sounds like you don't want to live pretty long. And you won't get to live much longer if you keep disobeying our master." The crowd, although many were starving, began to also express their displeasure with the little boy's defiance against the master's instruction. Yeah, you wrong, boy. That boy's going to get us all in trouble with the master." The entire crowd began to shout that their master is going to be so angry. And as their anger escalated, they demanded that the child be punished immediately. They said that the boy should be punished for disobeying their master. The child's mother picked up the child and ran through the woods with the boy. The angry enslaved Africans pursued her. The young mother continued to run as fast as she possibly could until she slipped and fell with her son into a creek where they both drowned. Most of the enslaved Africans witnessing the tragedy felt that the boy's death was good riddance because he had been a thorn in the master's side ever since he was born. They then directed their attentions to go and repair the broken lock to conceal the child's action from their master. The slaves repaired the damaged lot and put it back on the door as if it hadn't been disturbed. They then went on to resume their typical mornings preparing for their daily chores, feeling very little remorse for the deceased mother and child. The enslaved in these stories were more concerned with offending their master than they were about the death of a young mother and her child. How is it possible that these enslaved Africans could express more concern for their master than their fellow enslaved one, especially a young mother and her child? This type of devotion to the master was common behavior among many African slaves in America. Moreover, when rebellious, conscious African slaves were planning a revolt, often the other slave would forewarn the master. During the Civil War, many African slaves even attempted to defend their master's home and family against approaching Union soldiers. There's even evidence that some Africans fought on the side of the South. How absurd to imagine such behavior and loyalty to their masters at their own expense and their own preservation. These actions by the enslaved Africans extend beyond just mere loyalty. These behaviors of the enslaved Africans was a result of them being socialized to think in ways that benefits the white society, their enslavers. Such a brainwashing scheme was deemed necessary for maintaining dominance over the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation merely abolished physical slavery, but the far more worse mental enslaving aspect has never been removed nor addressed. The African Americans today are direct descendants of those slaves that was conditioned to think in ways that served the white society. When slavery was abolished, there was no effort made to restore the damaged psyche upon Africans. No psychologists rushed in to study the impact of hundreds of years of slavery upon their minds. This was unlike the Jewish atrocities that lasted less than 12 years. When it ended, World War II, which saw America, with the support of the UN, secure land within the Palestinian territory and committed millions of dollars towards building and establishing the nation of Israel. It was deemed appropriate and necessary to rebuild and to restore the culture, history, psyche, and life of the European Jews. However, in contrast to how the Jews were treated, white America turned its back on a moral obligation to rebuild the lives and restore the psyche of the newly emancipated African slaves. Unlike at the conclusion of World War II, when the Jewish Holocaust ended and the US and the UN contributed massive financial support to rebuild their lives of the Jews, there was no moral obligation to do the same for we Africans. Although the African Holocaust lasted hundreds of years longer, resulted in millions of more deaths, and more greatly decimated the African culture, when slavery was abolished, America, Great Britain, and the many other white nations that benefited themselves from their brutal exploitation of Africa felt no moral obligation to restore the culture of African people. They instead focused on their own self-interest by socializing the collective minds of Black people to think in ways that are against our own interests and that instead serves and protects the interests of their white society. Socialized is when the oppressors exploit their monopoly over information that are systematically and repetitively fed into the collective minds of the oppressed to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that serves and protects the interests of the oppressors. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of a subordinate population that makes them adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant culture. There are 4 ways to effectively socialize an entire generation of people: by what they're taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media image that we see, and the societal narratives that we repetitively hear, they've exploited these combined factors to covertly socialize the collective minds of Black people to think and behave that benefits the white society without most of us even realizing it. It's how the white society secretly protects itself from massive unified Black retribution. The African slaves of the 21st century are those who cannot overcome their socialized minds. Brothers and sisters, it's time for us to recognize our reality. When we assign a Bible or Willie lynchment to our real life oppression, That's no different than assigning a comic book to our oppression. This is the truth. We've been socialized, and the socialized being reinforced daily, unrelentingly. They begin socializing us through our education development by a curriculum that conceals all black racially affirming facts from us, which conditions us to accept a subordinate status from the white dominant society. And they continually to reapply as socialized upon our minds through media propaganda that keeps us believing the fraudulent worse about ourselves, which makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. Brothers and sisters, it's really time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace.